It started. You can take it away, Chris. Thank you.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our February Limfinity Developer webinar. I'm Chris Baker. I'm the Product Development Manager here at Brooks Life Sciences. And today we're going to have Jacob Rabb. He's one of our software engineers in the team. So Jacob's going to demonstrate the power of grids and how to properly pass arguments into the payload of the grid. So if you have any questions, we can take those throughout, or also we'll have some time at the end, and I'll let Jacob take it from there.
Thank you, Chris. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Jacob. I'm a software engineer at Brooks. I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off and jump right into the system so we can take you through the demo. Okay, you should all be seeing Limfinity at this point. All right. So first of all, if you're familiar with Limfinity, you probably already know what a grid is, but let's just start from the very basics. A grid is a list of subjects displayed in the table-like format. So each row here is a single subject, in this case of the patient subject type, and each column represents a field on that patient. How is a grid made? A grid is made, typically it's paired with our no confirmation dialog option here. You can have a grid where you ask the user for some, parameters for their search, for instance. But a lot of times you'll see grids with this on. This skips the before script and goes straight into the after script. You'll notice when I click the button, it went straight to the grid. It didn't ask me for anything. Building a grid has three key parts. You're going to need a subject type to tell the system what subject it's supposed to be displaying. In this case, patients. You're going to need a query to tell the grid which subjects of that type it should display. In this case, I have left it as the empty string to indicate that I want to see all subjects. And you're going to need a search GUID. We'll revisit this in more detail a little bit later on, but you can kind of think of this like a way to uniquely identify the search. Another argument here is this params needs search panel. What that does is adds the advanced search to the grid. So you'll notice that on my grid, I have the ability up here to search the fields on the patient. That's pretty common. Some honorable mentions for arguments. We have the params save search that allows you to provide a particular save search as opposed to a query. We have params QB filters that allows you to provide some custom filters at the top. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to give the user full advanced searching capabilities. So you can provide a couple of custom fields that they can search their grid on instead of the whole, range of fields and or operators, etc. We also have the ability to do params limit and params start. Those are the typical, SQL operations where you can decide that you want to show a subset of items based on a particular limit and based on, starting at a certain page. That can be handy if you have a grid that, might display a ton of items, but you have a tool that allows the user to clear them out of the grid. Any questions so far? All right, so we'll move on to a formatted grid. This grid, you'll notice it has a lot more information about these patients that's more relevant to an end user. Now, let's go over how this is done as well. Remember the search GUID, that's key to this concept. So in this case, it's all patients FRM. When I go to configure this grid, I can see that I'm configuring the grid for all patients FRM. What this allows you to do is to have multiple tools in the system which bring up a grid that's identically formatted, right? So you could have 3 or 4 tools that all point to this all patients FRM, and they all will come up with these particular columns. You can also configure the default grid for patients itself if you want to show for every grid have a certain type, every grid that doesn't have a specific configuration. On this setup, you can do a lot of interesting stuff. You can add patients or any linked subjects, pretty much any field from them. You can control if you want to give it a certain name on the on the grid, you want to give it a different display name, you can do that. You can control whether it's visible by default or not. You can control the width of the column, by default and whether it's sortable. And another thing you can do with this is you can actually configure this as an end user rather than as a system. So let's say that I'm an end user of this system and I pull up this grid every day, but I actually don't care about MRN registration date or this. I just want to see the core information about that patient. I can do that. Let's say I want to see date of birth first. I can do that. Let's say I want this column to be a little smaller to just fit the date, and I want this one to take up the remaining space so that I can see their whole name. I can do all of that. And note that when I click the tool again, the grid refreshes and I still have my same configuration. That is tied to every end user in the system. It's based on the GUID of the grid, so they can have the configuration for each grid individually. And it typically persists across system updates unless it's been explicitly disabled by the developer. If you make major changes to a grid, then you can't expect your configuration to work. The user can easily remove their own preferences as well. This comes in handy. A lot of times you'll get requests, from specific users to make very specific changes to the grid that, doesn't really make sense to do for the global grid. So you can explain to them how to do this and easily configure it themselves. Any questions so far? All right, then we can move on to adding tools to a grid. This is fairly simple in Limfinity 7. There is this one also has a unique search GUID, all patients tools. When I click it, I'll get this grid that has some tools on the right-hand side. This is done also through the grid configuration. You'll notice that at the bottom here, I have tool groups, and I have a particular tool group attached to the grid. And bringing it full circle, if I go in and look at my tools, you'll see that I have a tool group called patient tools that has those 3 tools in it. So you can drag and drop tools into those tool groups and configure what tools will show there. This is a fairly common Limfinity paradigm to have a list of subjects and the ability to add and edit them, possibly archive, delete, etc., from the right-hand side. So, if I add one of these here, I don't have to jump to another page to mess with them, right? They've been just added directly to my grid. I can edit them, change the diagnosis, etc.